and welcome to Pompe Island Discs, a new podcast series from the Pompe Support Network, in which we'll be speaking with members of the UK Pompe community, from patients and carers to healthcare professionals, about their relationship with Pompe, and all via a selection of some of their favourite music. I'm Luke Fraser. I live with Pompe myself, having been diagnosed back in my teens. I'm also a musician and composer, and so this is a project which holds a double interest for me. I'm sure you're all familiar with a certain well-known and much-loved radio show, and hopefully without treading on too many toes, we thought that taking a little inspiration from this could be a great way to draw out some Pompe stories that might inform and even inspire the wider community. Each episode will feature a guest interview and discussion. To listen to the music itself, please click on the accompanying playlist, which will be published on the Pompe Support Network website alongside each episode of the podcast as it's released. Today's episode features Malcolm Knightley from Southampton, who was diagnosed with late-onset Pompe back in 2009 at the age of 56. Malcolm, a very warm welcome to Pompe Island Discs, and many thanks for agreeing to meet today.
Hello, absolute pleasure.
Could we perhaps start with a sketch of your life pre-diagnosis? Do you remember signs of the condition going much further back? And if so, could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, going back to my childhood, memories are around being very poor at sport at school. So although being able to run, not being able to run as fast as others, just generally not being very good, but just kind of accepting that I simply wasn't as good as all the others. I didn't have any problems with mobility or anything else, no other signs that anything was amiss. And then as I progressed through life, it was quite some years before, probably in my early 50s, that I came to sense that I was getting breathless, unable to do normal things, or struggling to get upstairs, steps, but still putting it down to poor fitness levels, really. But I guess because my overall condition was declining so slowly, it was imperceptible. You know, my kids who are adults were saying, Dad, you need to go to the gym and get fit, all those kind of things. But I was putting everything down to poor fitness, yes, before I embarked on a kind of pathway towards diagnosis after reporting certain problems.
And before that point, Malcolm, let's say in your kind of 20s and 30s and 40s, had you been able to lead more or less what you might consider a normal active lifestyle?
So, I mean, I can remember that in 2004, I was able to walk up steps carrying a box. So I would have been in my late 40s, maybe around about 50. And so I can remember that up to that point, things seemed fairly normal to me. So being able to get upstairs without having any really major difficulty, but carrying something, you know, a box full of stuff up steps. So I was probably around about 50 when things were still okay. It was really after that.
And you must have got the sense that this wasn't just aging. It wasn't just being a little bit unfit. Maybe it's a little bit more something going on.
No, absolutely correct. I wasn't putting it down to age, but I was still, even though the challenges were increasing, I was still in my mind putting it down to lack of fitness. And it was really family members and my wife were saying, you know, really, I think you should make an appointment at the GP just to be checked over. So after a certain amount of time, my son-in-law said, look, you're not right. So he phoned the GP and put the phone in my hand and said, you need to talk to the GP. And that was really the very first step. I was quite reluctant, Luke, and I don't know why. There's just some inbuilt kind of thing in your head that says, no, I don't know. It's this strange mechanism in our heads, isn't it, that seems to resist these things.
I think we tend to, I know, speaking for myself, I tend to normalize everything that's happening. And you think, well, that's just,
Sure.
You know, that's just normal, you know, that I feel this way, you know, and you don't always realize, particularly when you're talking about before, the changes that happen so incrementally over such a long period of time. And it's very hard to objectively get the sense of exactly how far you've, you know, progressed in terms of symptoms and whatnot, getting worse when it happens so slowly over such a long period of time.
And of course, you don't have any reference points to compare what would be normal for somebody else. So in a
Yes.
sense, you're going to normalize, aren't you, as you
Yeah,
say?
you really do. I think everything just becomes, well, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get on to your diagnosis journey in a little bit. But before that, I thought maybe we could just talk about your first music selection, which I think is the oldest one of all the ones you selected. So it's something of a classic English folk tune, Bobby Shafto.
Yes.
Itself, I think, dating back a very long way, but given here kind of a New Orleans style twist, I guess, by
Yes.
the Chris Barber Big Band. Do you want to tell me a little bit about your choice here?
Yeah, sure. This goes back to my childhood. And it was really because I was born in 1953. So it was really towards the end of the 50s that I began to start noticing music and what was played. And my father liked very much trad jazz. And so this was on one of the first albums that I think we had in the house. I can still remember the cover of it. It kind of transports me back, as music tends to do. And so that gave me an appreciation how incredibly talented these guys were. And of course, they improvise as well. They hand over to each other, and I like this melody, and
Yeah.
it's brilliant, isn't it?
It's very toe tapping. I would say it makes me want to get up and dance, but I think my dancing days are kind of a little bit
Yes,
behind me. So it's going to be a bit more kind of toe tapping and head bobbing, I think, at this point.
yeah. We call it music to make you smile. It's kind of what I call happy music. It lifts your mood.
It really does. It's impossible not to be in a good mood when
Yeah.
you listen to it. So
Yeah.
no, it's great. I really enjoyed listening to that one. Let's move on a bit, if you don't mind, to your pathway to diagnosis for Pompe. I know many out there have had a complex and often rather protracted journey in this sense. Was it like that for you?
Yes, I think it was pretty classic, really, for those with this condition. It wasn't too torture for me, but I think for some it can take years. For me, I reported in with my GP, made an appointment, and he did a peak flow test. And he said, "Do you smoke?" And I said, "No." And he says, "You've got the lung function of somebody that's been smoking heavily for about 20 or 30 years." So he referred me to the respiratory unit in Plymouth. I went there, they did some tests and discovered that I was going into respiratory failure 75 times an hour.
Wow.
And so he determined over a little while that I had a bilateral weakness of the diaphragm and then treated me for sleep apnea. So they put me onto a BiPAP machine because by this time I was falling asleep half an hour after waking up.
I went through that same phase myself.
Oh, wow.
In
Really?
my early 20s, yeah, I went through a very rapid decline, and BiPAP was really the thing that, well, it's the reason I'm still around, mainly before we even talk about, ERT. For me, it was
Sure.
not. It was kind of night and day when I started, ventilation at night. Was it a big change for you in terms of?
Yes, my life was now becoming very difficult because I was driving. I had to stop the journey,
Yeah,
pull into
yeah,
a lay-by and just say, "Oh, I just need 10 minutes." And I'd actually doze off in the car.
which
And
is not great.
no, it's not good for your health. Anyway, I go on BiPAP. The respiratory nurse came out and set the BiPAP up and said, "This is going to transform your life." And I sincerely doubt that. And next day, after sleeping with this BiPAP machine, I felt superhuman and I was awake for like 15 hours.
Mm.
It was probably the biggest change in my life ever, to be feeling like you're at death's door one day and almost superhuman the next.
Yeah, me too. I
Um,
mean, it's uncannily similar. I liken it to filling up an empty fuel tank or something. It was just, just as you
yeah,
say, it was night and day, and I felt
yeah,
absolutely great for at least a couple of years or something after that. I think compared to obviously how depleted I'd been, kind of, just oxygen wise before that point, and how exhausting everything was. So yeah, very interesting to hear it was so similar for you. And then after the BiPAP, how did it progress beyond
right.
that?
Well, I guess at that stage, we thought we nailed it, that actually you're sorted.
Yeah.
Right. So, I felt great. The consultant, very good consultant, was pleased. But I go back for a kind of review a little while later. And my wife and I sat in with the consultant. And he said, there's something not right with this. But he said, you're not a contender for sleep apnea because your build is not right. He said, normally people have a lot of flab around the neck. He just said, I have a feeling that something's not right here. So he said, I think I remember a patient from a number of years ago who had something similar. And he said, would you just squat on the ground and stand up? And then obviously I couldn't do that. So he Googled it straight away. He Googled and said, there it is. He said, that's what I think it is. He said, I think it's Pompe. But the only reason he knew that is because he remembered a previous patient.
I mean, it's a kind of remarkable bit of chance in a sense that he had this previous patient and a bit of intuition on his part. I wonder what would have happened for you if that hadn't been the case.
Yeah, exactly. That has gone through my mind quite a lot. So he then referred me to neurology. So then I had, you know, where they throw needles into your muscles and do traces in the computer?
Right.
Is looking for normal muscle function. So I have this test and I asked the technician what he was thinking. And he said, well, you know, I'm not a doctor. But he said, none of those are normal. None of them, even the muscles that I have strength with, my upper body's okay. But he said, none of them are completely normal. Anyway, the consultant gets hold of that, and there was other tests that came. I had MRI scans and goodness knows what. And this took a few months, actually. At one point, I had to phone up the hospital because I thought I'd been forgotten. So this is a few months later, and they invited me in to receive a diagnosis. So anyway, I'm invited in, and I'm sat before the doctor who hadn't been briefed properly and was just clearly just given the file and asked me what I was there for. So I said, well, I'm here to find out whether I've got a confirmed diagnosis of Pompe. And she said, oh, yeah, you've got it. That was that.
Bye.
Yeah, hello, goodbye.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, what's the prognosis? And she said, I don't really know. She said, I think there are some specialist hospitals around. I think there might be one in Wales, but I'll look into it and get back to you. I came out of that feeling really down because I think they'd handle it very badly. But anyway, my daughter, she said, leave it with me. And she determined very quickly there was a specialist centre at Salford. And so she phoned them up. And Salford said, yeah, we can take him, but we'll need a referral from your GP. So I phoned my GP and said, told him that I needed a referral from him to Salford. And so he said, what is it they think you've got? And I said, well, I've got a confirmed diagnosis of Pompe disease. And he said, yeah, never heard of that, obviously. And anyway, referred me. And within a fortnight or so, I was sat with a consultant in Salford who asked me to tell my story. And he said, that's a classic story for those with Pompe. So that was incredibly empowering, actually, psychologically, to sit with somebody who knew about my condition. And I think that's a defining moment in the pathway. So having the diagnosis being very poorly handled at that point, but then for me, thankfully, within a short space of time, sitting with a consultant who was able to talk to me about the condition and the fact that there was a therapy, a reasonably new therapy.
Were you able to transition straight onto ERT at that point?
Yes, we were living down near Plymouth at the time, and they put me on as quickly as they could. It wasn't too many weeks, but it meant travelling up from Plymouth to Salford twice a month for 6 months.
That's a long way.
Yeah, but the knowledge that you're actually on a therapy, I mean, he told me there's no cure. So he made it very clear to me that the nature of the condition explained it and why there was no cure at this stage, but there was a first generation drug available. That was good news. That was really good news.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about your second music selection, which is Book of Dreams by Suzanne Vega from her third album, Days of Open Hand, released just following that period at the end of the 80s, I think, when she achieved kind of her big commercial breakthrough. So what inspired your choice of this song in particular?
Right. Okay. Again, there's a bit of a story attached to it because I bought this car and somebody had left the tape in the tape player. These are the days of cassette tapes.
Oh, yeah.
So it was Solitude Standing. had that Luca track on it, which, you know, I really enjoyed. So I listened to this album and I think this lady's got something, you know, and it just kind of appealed to me, a general style. So I started buying her stuff, and it's very difficult to choose an absolute favorite. I just kind of like this one. It's a kind of fairly upbeat. Some of those are very kind of cerebral, if you know what I mean.
Right,
It's
yeah.
kind of,
This one's quite straight ahead.
it's quite
It's a kind of
straightforward.
uplifting one.
Yeah, it is, and I like that.
I wonder, I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but I was listening to the lyrics and just wondering if there's anything about the lyric which made you pick this out. Because she sings about the book of dreams, or the book of her life, I guess. And she talks about the spine of the book being bound to last a life, but the fact that it's also kind of tough enough to take a pounding. You get the sense of someone who's a real survivor in that sense.
That's one quality in her song, is you know that it means something, even if you can't work it out. Luca is a tragic story.
Yeah.
It almost seems too upbeat for the content of the lyric. But I find her just an interesting musician who's really made a good contribution. She does it her way. She's not following anybody.
Yeah.
She's completely original, and I like that.
No, it's great. Yeah, and I didn't know that album actually, so it was interesting for me to listen to that. So thank you. So Malcolm, could you describe a bit your daily life with Pompe these days? How are you affected physically, and to what extent has that changed since your time of diagnosis?
Well, now in retirement, we live in a bungalow, so everything is adapted around me, really. So there are no challenges within the property. I have a rise and recline chair. I have what's called a bed lever because my upper body strength is actually quite good, which I absolutely depend on for getting out of chairs. So if I'm sat at the table, I don't have enough power in my lower body to do a sit to stand maneuver anymore. So getting out of a chair is extremely difficult. If I didn't have this rise and recline chair that I'm in now, I can do it, but it's extremely difficult because I have to kind of turn myself over and then push up. If I'm getting out of the chair at the table, I have to use my upper body strength to push up, which is not too difficult because I still have power in my upper body. So sort of around the house, the bathroom is a wet room because now I can't step up a curb. Even with sticks, I wouldn't risk it, although I probably would be all right. I don't need aids around the house, but if I go into the garden, which I like to do, I use walking sticks. I have a ramp down to the garden with rails. I can't walk any distance, even with sticks now, because I just get too depleted of energy and I become very breathless. The car we've got has a slightly higher driving seat. It's an SUV, so that when I get out, I'm perched and it's easy for me. It's at the right height for me to move in and out of. So in terms of daily sort of impacts, because I'm on BiPAP, I don't have any problem, and this might be quite unusual for people with Pompe. I don't experience fatigue. Obviously, there's things I can't do, but I don't experience sort of fatigue and have to sleep in the afternoon or anything like that. I try to stay on my feet doing things rather than stay seated, because the easy thing would be to be seated all day. So I try and keep active and put body weight through my frame so that at least, you know, my muscles are being used. I can't walk for pleasure. I can't do that. I can't cycle. I can't do all those things. I have a lightweight folding powered wheelchair that I keep in the car so that, you know, I could go into a shop. Beverly would need to be with me because she has to lift the wheelchair out and open it up, get it ready for me to use. Getting out of the wheelchair into the car is just a little bit of a challenge, but, you know, I can do it. So I feel fairly stable. But of course, I'm not reminded in the home of what I can't do because it's all designed around me. I'm not constantly reminded in my daily life, oh, I can't do that, or it's the stairs or steps.
But it does sound like you're in a rhythm where your lifestyle is quite sustainable at the moment in terms of the adaptations you've made and the fact that physically, as you say, it's kind of okay for you to be doing what you're doing.
I'm able to do all the things I really want to do. Yes, so I don't feel that this is going to sound rather strange to some, but I've come to terms with the diagnosis, which, you know, you do in the early days. But I don't feel, so when I'm filling in forms about how do you feel, I feel that the quality of my life is good, you know. Do I feel well? Well, yes. It's quite difficult to convey somebody might look at me and see that how challenged I am, but actually, I don't feel that my quality of life is that diminished.
And that's really positive. I think it sounds like you're managing to live a good life. Of course, there's things you can't do. Maybe if you had been, I don't know, harboring ambitions to be a marathon runner or something, maybe, you would have to let that kind of thing go. But, within
Exactly.
what you're describing, it sounds like you're carving out a good life and an enjoyable one. And I think that's really important takeaway for people out there. We should move on a little bit to your next musical choice. We're going classic rock. Doesn't get
Yeah.
much more classic than Led Zeppelin. Good Times, Bad Times, released back in 1969 from their eponymous debut album. Good memories for you, this one?
Oh, yeah. So I was doing A levels, I think. Music was very experimental in the 60s. Of course, Led Zeppelin were that was a bit like an explosion into completely new territory. And this was a track that a friend of mine and I used to sit in his bedroom, and he had massive speakers that were about a metre tall. He had two of them in this small bedroom, and there's just enough room to get his bed in. We used to sit with this stuff booming out in his bedroom. Yeah, it was incredible. It transports me back to my mid-late teens and, some great memories of what were good times.
It's a while since I've actually heard that record, but just listening back to it again yesterday, it just brought back what an amazing vibe they had as a band. Just the groove in that tune is incredible.
Yeah.
The drums in particular is just like, yeah.
John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page were music arrangers, weren't they, in the 60s themselves? So they were session musicians. They were actually quite proficient musicians in their own right, and they were extremely talented as musicians. But yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, incredible band. So yeah, thanks for selecting that one. Right, the next bit I think we've kind of covered. I was going to ask you about adaptations and any things that have made living with Pompe more manageable. Is there anything there that we haven't discussed yet?
I kind of road tested, if you like, a device called Sit and Stand, which is an assistive device that lifts you out of the chair. It's portable,
Mm-hmm.
and it's battery operated. So I've used this thing on aeroplanes. I sometimes put it in the wheelchair, use it in the garden so that I can sit in a garden chair. I don't use it all the time when I'm sat at the dinner table because I want to use my muscles to get up.
Right.
So I don't want to be overcompensating for my limitations. I want to be able to still, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's kind of, I still want to be bringing my muscles into play, but it enables me to do things that I wouldn't normally be able to do easily. So getting out of an aircraft seat is an absolute nightmare. And with this, it's easy. And that's been an absolute life changer. Of all the things I've ever bought, if I was only to have one, that would be the one. If you're challenged, if your core muscles are weak and you're struggling with the sit-stand maneuver, that's the device. Other devices are the wheelchair, obviously. It's carbon fiber, very light, 13 kilos, very easy to pick up. Other than that, it's just basically the standard things to assist, like rails in the bathroom, certain modifications so I can raise myself up, those kind of things. Those are the main assistive devices that I've found very, very helpful.
Your next music pick. This one brought a smile to my face. I'm always up for transcriptions of the music of J.S. Bach. This one is really nicely done, I thought. It's the famous Toccata and Fugue in D minor, BWV 565, performed by a brass quintet called Canadian Brass from their 2003 album Amazing Brass. Could you talk me through a little bit about your selection here?
Yes, that's because I used to like playing in a small ensemble because I'm was a brass player. It's been years since I've played, but again, I can appreciate good musicians and incredibly talented players. And these are a collection of, I think, 5 of probably the best around, and form themselves into this group is absolutely amazing because they get the sounds. I mean, I can't tell you how difficult that music is to play. It would be virtually impossible for most players.
Yeah, they make it sound easy. It's a really cracking performance. And as you say, the arrangement, I loved it as well. I think the original version is for pipe organ, and it's one of those kind of bits of music you'll hear in movies and TV shows or whatever. It's almost become iconic, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I think this version And this arrangement, it kind of has this kind of freshness and lightness. It's
Yeah.
got a bit of a bounce in its step, which is just a really nice to hear in relation to the original, much as I like the original.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
enjoyed being introduced to that one. Malcolm, you're currently a trustee of the Pompe Support Network. Full disclosure, as am I myself. And I know you've been to AGSD conferences and so on previously. I just wanted to discuss really a bit about your experience with the Pompe community in the UK and even beyond, if that's relevant, and if this has helped with your perspective on living with the condition.
Yes. The Salford Specialist Unit recommended that I looked at support around and signposted me towards the then AGSD. And my wife and I attended the conference in 2010 in London. So that was our first introduction to a supportive network. And yeah, we just found that incredibly interesting. And again, it's this kind of empowering that happens when you're not alone. It was just this sense of, and just not being alone, being part of a community. And I think because there's not too many of us, there is a sense where you can sort of appropriate this sense of belonging to a community. It's uplifting in a way to know that you're not the only one. You're communicating with others who know and understand. But it was really great just to be together with other members of the Pompey community. We have a shared experience. It was just brilliant, a sense of actually belonging to something, that was bigger than yourself. So through the years, I've come to value spending time with other members of the Pompe community, and also very interested in how things are moving forward with research, with the pharmaceuticals who are moving things forward.
Which we'll touch on in a minute, if that's okay. But yeah, if I understand you rightly, and I would definitely second this, connecting with the community at large, it's partly information sharing, isn't it? And knowledge is kind of power. I think just knowing the lie of the land, you feel a bit less helpless, or things feel a bit less grim, just knowing what's out there. And also, I think, as you say, it kind of lifts your mood a bit, connecting and networking with other people, and finding there's people out there with similar experiences. I think it's less isolating in terms of how one feels with living with a condition like this.
I agree. I think the word isolating is a very key word here, that if you can help people out of that sense of isolation, which belonging to some kind of body like this can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, and through that, just finding out what's out there, whether that's therapies or treatment options and support and all the rest of it. It's just knowing about that stuff is really kind of empowering, I think.
Yes.
On to your penultimate music pick. This is called Thank You by Alanis Morissette, from the tail end of her kind of imperial phase in the 90s. I have to say, I don't think I've heard this track for a very, very long time. And I'd almost forgotten it, actually. And then just listened back to it and I was like, oh yeah, that used to be on the radio all the time. It was a real blast from the past. Do you want to tell me a little bit about your choice here?
Yeah, just very simple, really. Watched a film 3 or 4 years ago, and this song was used at the end of the film. There's a quality in this that I find difficult to define. The lyrics are intriguing, but in the arrangement, there's some chord progressions, which for me kind of land very well. I'm finding it hard because it's subjective, but it has this quality to it that I can't really define, but I instantly thought, it's just a song that I just like.
Yeah, just musically, it's that classic 90s power anthem feel to it to me. It really takes you there straight away. Apparently, she wrote the song after a trip to India, and she was going through what she called a period of hiatus, where she was just trying to slow down and redefine and just reconnect with life. And I don't know, I sometimes find her lyrics quite on the nose, but the fact that she can do that and kind of get away with it and just be so direct, I kind of like, I kind of admire. I think she kind of brings it off.
Yeah, certainly does.
It's really enjoyable to listen to that again. It's funny how these things are just there, they're buried somewhere in your memory, and one day they just come back out again. You just hear them, and it's really funny. It's like a time capsule.
You can almost forget how good it sounded at the time.
Yeah. I mean, it was a great era, I think, 80s, 90s, just so many great artists and tunes around at that point. Do you want to tell me a little bit about hope in terms of, therapies and what your expectations might be?
Well, to even discover that there was a therapy was amazing to start with. And then after a few years, to also discover that we're approaching the point of second generation with the improvements on take-up from the cell is a sense of hope, because we know that research is being done. And we know that in terms of progress, it never stops. So once you're on that trajectory, hopefully there will be in the future a point at which genetically this can be even correcting the root. That on the horizon somewhere. And so we're somewhere between the first generation, second generation, and that point. The gene therapy thing has a little way to go, I think, but that in itself would be a breakthrough. But I have to say, I'm 73 now, so I think future generations will be benefiting from things that weren't available to us earlier. So I think the general direction of travel is really hopeful. And if there's another third generation, that'd be great. If I was 30 years younger, then I might be thinking, we need something a little bit better. But for me, I'm at a certain stage,
Yeah.
and that does affect your perspective when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to these things. I would think the future looks pretty good. Once you know you've got something and you come to terms with it, you then start thinking of the future. What does it hold? There's work being done in this whole area of research, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Absolutely. And I think just comparing it to what the landscape was like, well, when I was diagnosed back in the late 90s and there was no treatment and there didn't even seem to be any sign of being any treatment from what I could work out at that point, that was rather a gloomy time, I have to say. So to have come this far, we're now 2 generations of ERT in. And as you say, there's all of these other types of treatments being developed. For me, nothing ever quite moves fast enough. I'm always going to be a bit impatient in that sense, but I do share your optimism. I think things are only going to get better in terms of treatment options. So for such a rare condition, I think we're in a relatively fortunate position of having so much interest from industry kind of surrounding it. So definitely cause for optimism. I agree with you. Last but not least, your 6th music selection. This is the Beatles, but maybe one of their slightly lesser known tracks, And Your Bird Can Sing, from the 1966 album Revolver. So out of kind of so many classic Beatles songs, why this one?
Yes, okay. I remember from their first hits. And then, you journey through the 60s, because coming into my teens in 1966, again, things were moving on so quickly. But the Revolver album was a particular favourite of mine, and there are a number of songs on there. But I like the guitar work on this one. It's John Lennon's song. And I was interested to read some of his notes because, he had a notebook and you can see his crossings out of some of the lyrics that were initially put down. I'm not too sure what it's all about. But for me, it's kind of happy kind of song, and it's got that what I would call 100% Beatles quality to it.
I really love Revolver. I think it's a great period in their evolution, much as I like some of the later stuff. And the early stuff is obviously amazing pop tunes. But I think Revolver's, for me, I'm going to be a bit controversial here and say I actually prefer it to Sgt. Pepper, which came after, and which is obviously really amazingly highly regarded. But I don't know, Revolver, it's that sweet spot in the middle for me, between the kind of early poppy stuff and the more kind of experimental conceptual stuff that they did, with Sgt. Pepper or whatever. Yes. It's just, it kind of rocks in a great way. So yeah, it's definitely an album I come back to a lot.
Totally agree with you. I think it was almost like a tipping point. It was kind of, things were moving on, and a little bit of Eastern influence on George Harrison stuff you've got in there. So you're kind of almost moving into a different era in terms of their studio stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely it's almost like a band just evolving, really, I think, so much at that point.
Yeah.
So I guess that more or less brings us here. I just wanted to ask if there's anything else you'd like to talk about or add yourself, really, at this point.
What I want to say is just simply that there is definitely life after Pompe. And my own story is just simply of being shocked to the core, going online, then reaching the point of, I think, psychologically, a point of almost acceptance in a way, and starting to normalize. And what I would say is there is definitely life after diagnosis. And I can honestly say, the way I feel now is that my life is fulfilled and I don't feel diminished in any way. I spend a lot of time with family, so I value the important things in life. Yeah, so I just really want to finish on a note of encouragement, really. Things are moving forward in terms of therapies. Yeah, so I hope I finish on a high note.
That's great to hear. And I mean, hopefully great also for others out there to hear that you can have a good quality of life with Pompe. I think it's just finding your rhythm and working within that and focusing on the important things out there in life. But yeah, no, it's really positive to hear your take there. Thank you so much for joining today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please keep an eye and an ear out, everyone, for the next episodes of Pompe Island Discs. I'm Luke Fraser. Thank you for listening.